Well, the history is that in the 1960s and 1970s, people engaged in educational research, not me, because I hadn't really gone into it by then, were very concerned about what was often called the unit of analysis problem. That is unit of analysis problem.
Right.
And that is briefly, you've got children, you've got schools, and you want to look at relationships, for example, between attainment and social background or whatever. Do you do it at the level of the school? In other words, do you relate average attainment of school to the average social background of the children, or do you do it at the child level? There's a literature about this, people saying, well, actually, you need to sort of, if you can, do it both, because both are important. And around about the beginning of the 1980s, people began to figure out how to do this. And there were one or two kind of seminal papers around about 1980, in this country mainly. Someone called Murray Aitken, who's still actually very active.
A woman?
No, Murray.
Murray.
He's in Australia now.
Yeah.
And I became interested, because I knew him quite well, and having read his stuff. And then around the mid-1980s, I and he and another group in the United States more or less independently worked out how to do this statistically. And we all doing it different ways, but coming to the same conclusions. And we began to realise that we were actually doing the same things, but using different computing techniques to get to the answers. And that became known as multi-level modelling.
Because from what I read, it sounded as though you were doing analysis involving different factors at the same time.
Yes, at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's a bit technical. It's a generalisation of something called regression analysis, which is has been standard technique for donkey's years. But this enables you to use that technique and similar techniques when you have data that has a complicated structure. In this case, you've got children who are grouped within schools. So the performance of any given child is affected by the fact they're in this school rather than some other school. It may be the quality of the teaching in the school. It may be that one school is more selective than another. So knowing which school a child is in tells you already something about the child's likely attainment. And that's information that is informative. So how do you incorporate that information when you're studying relationships at the child level? So do children with high attainment come from socially advantaged backgrounds? How do you take into account the effect of the school when you know that schools matter in terms of children differ between schools? So that's what it's about. It's how to deal with structures that have that hierarchical structure.
So tell me what that means.
Hierarchical structure means children grouped within schools.
Okay.
And schools could be grouped, for example, within education authorities. So it's another level of the hierarchy.
Right.
So we talk about levels. So the bottom level, level 1, school be level 2, local education authority level 3. And then the really nice thing is that once you've worked out how you deal with that, and that involves some fancy computing, then it turns out that those techniques apply to all sorts of other structures in the world.
Like hospitals, because you apply it to hospitals.
Exactly, you'd never thought of.
Right.
Apply it to hospitals, you can apply it to all sorts of disciplines. You can apply it commercially, you can apply it to firms who have different outlets in different places.